tax code 一出来，他们就是找 loophole， 他找漏洞了，对不对？他说哦，这个文字写的是 maybe， 不是 must， 所以 maybe 的话就是有弹性了，有 flexibility， 对不对 ？So that's what an attorney does。那一般的人你去念这个 tax code， 你搞不清楚，你知道？
所以 IRS 最恨的是 tax lawyer。
是啊，整天根本在打官司的就是 tax lawyer，
就是他们，对。
对。
但是Chinese 如果又会讲中文，然后又这个英文非常好，然后又是 CPA 又是 attorney， 他非常非常少，非常非常少。
对我真的是我建议你鼓励他这么去做，他一辈子不会愁饭吃，而且如果他中文好的话，他升得很快。
是，
我要说实话，今天如果我是说我自己律师事务所不干，我 LTL 我也不干，我去找
你马上就找工作。
I will be a partner for sure， 因为他就是需要我的中文能力去拉业务，就是。
对呀，非常好。好，在线上的朋友们，听见我跟 William 律师的一个闲聊可能你也学到一些东西，那就是让你的孩子们都去学金融，念 CPA， 学 lawyer 这是一个下一代的这个求职的一个方向我觉得真的是我自己呢也是学这个 accounting 出身的，所以我的 charge 现在不高这个1个小时我也跟William 律师一样，只 charge 450就可以了。因为我也是有 CLU CHFC 的，所以呢这个也是可以按 hour 来这样 charge for service 的。非常好。好，我们呢今天非常高兴请到 William 律师，我喜欢叫他 William 律师，是因为我觉得这样更亲切一些，而不是叫他严律师我这个先更正一下William 呢，他是这个加州Berkeley 大学毕业，而且呢在这个 UCLA 也获得了这个会计学方面的这个硕士，然后呢他也是法学方面的这样一个博士。那我们今天请到他真的是非常非常的荣幸。大家听到我们刚才跟威廉律师在聊天的时候大家觉得说他的中文讲得特别好，听不出口音来，但是呢我要在这里跟大家讲，其实他是生在美国长在美国真正的美国人。我儿子最不喜欢我说他是 ABC 了，他说这是 discrimination so racist 我女儿也不喜欢这样称呼，我们要称呼他们是美国人或者是华裔美国人，这样是比较正确的称呼。好，美国奥奇宏盛云星汇今天是第3期，那我们每一期呢都做得红红火火。2020年我们做了几十期的云客会，那也请来了许多的律师、会计师、金融分析师，也有医学方面的这个专家，以及教育学、心理学各个方面的这个人才，当然也包括我们地产方面、保险方面的一些专家们，带来了非常多的这个有价值的资讯。所以每一期不管是我们的云客会，还是我们2021年全面升级的云星会，每一次都非常多的人数。虽然在我们的线上呢，现在我们看到上百人在这个100多个端口里面，但实际上现在中国大陆还没有这个开工上班，也有不少人已经集中在办公室里面准备收听我们今天的讲座。所以每一场讲座呢，大家都千万不要错过，带来的都是满满的干货。好的，我少废话了，把时间交给威廉律师。好，时间是威廉律师你自己的。
好，谢谢 Heidi。等一下，我先 share 一下我的这个 PowerPoint。你们看得到吗？
看得到。
OK， 好先祝大家这个新年好。非常感谢这个 Heidi 邀请我来跟大家做今天这么一个讲座。今天这个主题呢，其实就是这个 Foreign Grantor Trust。 中文翻译成这个外国委托人信托。我先简单自我介绍一下，我是这个胜频律师事务所的这个创始人，这个律师事务所已经创办10年，我在法律这个业界从业已经16年，那我在胜频这边呢，其实主要是帮客户做这个遗产规划，那 my focus really is on advanced planning。这个 Heidi 特别熟悉，遗产规划，我相信大家比较熟悉的可能就是生前信托或者在保险业界的这些朋友可能比较熟悉的是这种保险信托，但是所谓的 advanced planning 会涉及到怎么样去保护资产，会涉及到怎么样去设计一些节税的一些信托或者一些结构，所以我是专门帮这种比较高端客户呢。去做这样子的一种策划和一些这个 plan 出来 ，OK， 同时呢，我也是这个洛杉矶 downtown LTL attorneys 的合伙人之一。那在 LTL 我其实是负责去主导率领的团队是专门做这个用这个智能科技去打这个官司的。So I'm very excited about this project， 因为我们知道未来这个智能确实会取代很多。这个人力也可以省到很多钱和这个资源，所以在这个智能科技这块呢，我们目前已经代表 Walmart， 代表这个福特汽车，代表 Liberty Mutual、Securitas 一些保险公司，所以这是我的一个 side project， 但是我主要的时间还是 focus 在我自己的这个事务所上面，那也就是去协助很多客户去做这么一些遗产的规划。今天讨论的主题呢，我们可能分几个阶段。首先呢we'll go over 这个一些税务上的一些考量。第二呢，我们会探讨一下这个 FGT 的定义到底是什么。再来，我们会 discuss 这个 FGT 在一个人还活着的时候怎么去应用。然后这个设立人走了以后是如何去应用。最后呢，我们当然会谈一下，就是说你做 FGT 的这个目标可能是什么 ，What goals can be achieved？ 然后最后我会给大家一个总结。So， 今天后面开始呢，我会用英文开始讲，因为我不知道线上的朋友有一些听不听得懂中文。So， 但是每一个这个 PPT 的 slide 上面都会有中文的翻译，所以希望就是你们可以跟得上。Okay, so as it relates to tax issues, right? First, we want to talk about U.S. tax considerations. So there's kind of a general framework there that we have to discuss, right? When we think of U.S. taxes, we think of income taxes, capital gains. We think of estate taxes, gift taxes, and the sort. For U.S. residents and U.S. citizens, they're actually taxed on worldwide income and assets. This concept is very important for people who have immigrated to the U.S., obviously, and for people who are still in the process of moving over to the U.S. But for foreign persons, for non-resident aliens, for 非美籍的这些人, only U.S. source income is subject to U.S. income tax and withholding. Okay, only U.S. source income is subject to U.S. income tax and withholding. Okay. However, U.S. located assets transferred during life or at death are subject to U.S. transfer taxes. 中文翻译成这个移转税。OK， 就是这个会涉及到赠与还有这个遗产这一方面。所以如果相信多数人可能有接触到这个问题，那我们知道这个目前这个免税的这个额度呢，对于非美籍的人，在美国境内的有形资产其实是只有6万块的这个免税的额度 ，right？ 那比起是说一个 U.S. permanent resident 或者 citizen， their lifetime exemption in 2021 is 11.7 million， right？ 这个差别很大，而且现在 under the Biden administration， 它不但是会把这个终身这个免税这个额度可能会降低，它也有可能会把这个遗产税的这个税率提升，从40%到45%。So what about global tax considerations? Right? So 我就列了几项，就是说可能比较大项的。So one is of course CRS. I think most people are familiar with CRS. A number of countries, China, Taiwan, a number of offshore entities, offshore countries such as Cayman, Bermuda, British Virgin Islands, Cook Islands. These are all participants under the Common Reporting Standard, right? So for people who traditionally have kept a lot of assets offshore in these jurisdictions, they're subject. The countries are subject to mandatory reporting, cross-reporting with one another. 2, we have the Foreign Account Tax Compliance Act and also FBAR, right? So this affects U.S. taxpayers who have foreign accounts and foreign assets, right? If you have a foreign bank account over 10,000, you have to report that to the IRS. If you have foreign assets amounting to over 50,000, you have to report that to the IRS. The key issue here is who's reporting and who's not reporting. Next, we have CFCs and PFICs. So the issue with this is traditionally a lot of people held investments in offshore entities as U.S. persons. So this triggers 5471 reporting, right? And 547 reporting can be very onerous for a lot of individuals who may not have properly reported in the past. And so these are some of the issues that a lot of my clients are having to deal with now. So as we start getting into trusts, it's important to make a distinction between domestic trusts and foreign trusts, right? The purpose of today's discussion is the foreign grantor trust. So this distinction must be made clear. So for federal U.S. federal income tax purposes, a trust is a domestic trust if it satisfies a 2-pronged test. The first is the court test, okay? This simply means that a court within the U.S. is able to exercise primary jurisdiction over the administration of the trust. So this is usually done when the trust is established under U.S. laws, U.S. trust laws, and with a U.S. trustee. The second prong of the test is the control test. And this is the prong of the test that I want everyone to focus on, right? So the control test says that one or more U.S. persons must have the authority to control all material, substantial decisions of the trust. So what is the key here? Well, the key here is that the prong fails if a non-U.S. person, whether a trustee, a trust protector, advisor, grantor, or even a beneficiary, has the ability to control or simply veto a material or substantial decision, right? So when we're designing a trust, a lot of people think about trusts as having 3 principal roles, right? You have the grantor, you have the beneficiary, and you have for a lot of the trusts that we set up directed trusts, which can include a number of different 角色在这个 trust 里面. So depending on the nationality of each of these participants in the trust, the trust can be deemed to be foreign or domestic. So why is it important for the trust to be classified as a foreign trust? Why is that important? Well, remember that a foreign person, a non-resident alien, Chinese national, Taiwanese national, a foreign national, is not subject to U.S. income tax on their non-U.S. income. Non-U.S. income, not subject to U.S. income tax. They're not subject to U.S. transfer taxes on non-U.S. assets, right? So what does that mean? Well, that means that a foreign trust, right, by virtue of being set up by a foreign national, right, is not subject to U.S. federal income tax on non-U.S. source income. Okay, so again, this aspect is key when designing these trusts for foreign grantors who intend to benefit U.S. beneficiaries, right? I think Grand Prospects alluded to that in their invitation for today's webinar, right? Which is, how do you take advantage of, taxation as a non-resident alien by virtue of having a US-based trust, right? So the key is to make the trust of foreign status. So now, what exactly is a foreign grantor trust? So a foreign person can establish a revocable foreign grantor trust in the US to hold non-US situs assets. So for example, shares in a non-US corporation. So typically you see this when people use offshore companies, and this offshore entity is actually owned by a foreign grantor trust. This offshore company then invests in certain jurisdictions, right? So there's a certain amount of attenuation between the actual shareholder, the individual, and the asset owned. And two, it's able to confer certain tax advantages, right? So what happens is, during the grantor's lifetime, neither the trust nor the grantor is taxed on non-US source income, right? We touched on that in the previous slide. But they may be subject to certain withholdings on US source income, okay? So we know that with US real estate, there's something called the FIRPTA withholding, which is a withholding based on the sales proceeds and not just on the gains, right? So that amount can sometimes be particularly onerous for non-resident aliens that own US real estate. But what are the exceptions to this US source income rule, right? Well, US rental income, right? By electing the net basis election, okay, US rental income can be deducted to a point where no taxes might be owed. The other exception is capital gains on stocks, right? We know recently in the stock market, a lot of people have made a lot of money in the last 2 years in Tesla, for example. A lot of people have made a lot of money in Bitcoin, right? So for certain classes of assets, even US source income is unaffected. Now, the additional benefit is that on the death of the grantor, no US estate tax accrues to non-US situs assets either. However, US estate tax will apply to US situs assets. So again, this gets back to that $60,000 exemption that we had just touched on, right? For non-residents who own US real estate directly, this is going to be a problem. This is going to be a problem. They cannot simply give the property away. They cannot, obviously pass away while still holding the property. This will create huge estate tax liability. But we do have a very powerful planning tool, right, which is life insurance, right? So often the way that life insurance is properly used in the context of an estate plan is to hedge against potential risk of estate tax liability, right? So your life insurance face amount should somewhat correlate to potential estate taxes that might be owed, right? So we can mitigate against this type of exposure using a proper life insurance product. So then how is FGT status achieved, right? How's it achieved? So under US grantor trust tax rules, a foreign grantor is treated as the owner of the trust if either the grantor has the power to revest title of the trust property in themselves, exercisable solely by the grantor. Effectively, this means that it's revocable. That's basically what it means, that this trust can be terminated. The assets can revest in the grantor individually. And also either without the approval of another person or with the consent of a related or subordinate party, right? So they can do this without anyone having to approve. They can unilaterally make this decision, or they can do so with the consent of someone who's related or subordinate to them under Internal Revenue Code 672C. So this gets into other roles in the trust that we talked about earlier, which is having a directed trust, an investment committee, a trust committee of sorts, a trust protector who is related or subordinate to the grantor, and this person can consent to this type of decision. Okay, that would render this a foreign grantor trust. The other way to do it is distributions of the trust may only be made during the grantor's lifetime to the grantor themselves or to the grantor's spouse, right? This is another critical design element of the foreign grantor trust. Basically, it means that you're assigning the income stream. The grantor remains the income beneficiary, right? And then the principal can obviously pass through the trust to another beneficiary. So what then is a typical foreign grantor trust structure? Okay, so I tried to make this as simple for everyone as possible, but it starts with the person at the very top. So you have a non-resident alien, a foreign grantor, a foreign trust protector perhaps, right? This person tells the trustee in the form of the trust document, which I would draft, exactly what the trustee can do, right? How the trustee is to invest, who is going to be on the trust committee, are there distribution advisors, investment advisors, you know, how is the trust corpus, the trust principle to be deployed, right? The trustee is named in this trust. The trust will then own maybe perhaps an offshore company, right? Which then owns the assets here in the US. The beneficiary can be foreign, can be a US person, but ultimately these assets would pass to the beneficiaries. So this is kind of your basic FGT structure. So the critical elements here are having a non-US grantor, a non-US trust protector, and then having that non-US private investment or holding company. That's kind of the key structure to set up an FGT. So then the next question is, well, what happens to an FGT when the grantor dies? Right. So at that moment, the trust becomes irrevocable, and an election has to be made for the trust to become its own separate taxpayer for U.S. income tax purposes. So when that happens, obviously, the trust becomes subject to much higher tax rates because it's now a separate U.S. taxpayer instead of being able to take advantage of the non-residents, more graduated, lower, potential no income tax assessment, right? Two, the U.S. estate tax will apply to any U.S. situs assets held in the trust, but again, not to non-U.S. situs assets, right? So why do we use a non-U.S. corporation? Because it's an estate tax blocker. Shares in non-U.S. corporations held by foreign persons are not subject to U.S. estate tax. If the real estate were owned directly in the name of the non-resident alien, there would be estate tax issues. But by virtue of owning it in a non-U.S. corporation, that problem can be alleviated. Okay, so consider holding U.S. investment assets within non-U.S. corporations. So again, today's discussion is based primarily on the assumption that the grantor is a non-resident alien, a foreign person. Okay, so just kind of keep that in mind. Obviously, if the client is a green card holder, is or soon to be a green card holder, this whole inquiry kind of changes, right? The whole planning side kind of changes. But remember, even while holding under non-U.S. corporations, if this person somehow does become a green card holder, if the non-U.S. corporation also has U.S. shareholders, then we get into that 5471 reporting and the tax accounting and compliance rules that apply to those types of companies. So again, finding the right accountant who's familiar with that type of reporting and filing is very, very important. So here we just look at, what the structure of a foreign grantor trust, when it becomes a foreign non-grantor trust, meaning it's irrevocable, what it looks like after death, right? So now the grantor is no longer in the picture. You simply have the trustee who directs this U.S. irrevocable trust that still owns the assets for the beneficiaries. Okay. So what then can an FGT accomplish, right? So with the proper design and implementation of an FGT, a number of goals can be achieved. One is, the foreign grantor can create a trust for their benefit during their own lifetime, as well as for U.S. beneficiaries. So this would be, I actually get asked this question quite a lot. And they always ask, well, I'm Chinese or I'm Taiwanese, can I set up a U.S. trust? So you can see here today that the answer is yes, right? You can take advantage of U.S. trust laws, and while preserving, non-resident alien tax status, and you can, create a potential income stream for yourself or for your beneficiaries. The other benefit is, any non-U.S. source income is not taxed by the U.S. And any U.S. source income is taxed to the foreign grantor and not the trust. So I briefly wanted to just bring in another concept, which we aren't touching on today, but which may also apply, right? So when we think of trust planning as a foreign national, I think in recent years, a lot of people have been pitched the idea about setting up an irrevocable trust, 不可撤销的信托, right? So in the context that we're discussing trust today, it would be a foreign non-grantor trust, an FNGT. But I think the important thing to realize is that it's not a one-size-fits-all proposition, right? When you're thinking about any type of estate plan, you can't say, okay, every person should just, if you're a foreign national, this is what you should do, because it is very much based on individual circumstance. Some people have no issues with CRS, right? All of their assets, all of their income over a number of years from their business have been properly reported. They have no concerns about CRS. Some people have concerns about CRS. Some people who are here already have concerns about FATCA. Maybe something was never reported, right? Some of them have, CFC issues, right? Some don't. So it's important when we talk to clients to figure out their circumstances and, more importantly, really what they want out of this. I'm not of the mindset of, I'm not the type of practitioner who says, okay, if you're a foreign national, just do A, B, and C. If you're a permanent resident, you do X, Y, and Z. I really like to discuss kind of holistically, what their family composition is. I even get into, whether their kids have been married, or whether their kids are married, do they have grandchildren, have they ever been in a divorce, what's their net worth overall, what kind of assets do they have in the U.S., what kind of assets do they have abroad, do they stand to get an inheritance from their parents. It's important to understand all of these circumstances before you can kind of advise on what type of trust is best for them, right? Because a foreign grantor trust works for some people, but it might not work for all. Some people prefer, hey, I don't want all of the, the complications with having this intermediary, offshore entity involved. All I want to do is just make gifts to my children. I want to use the trust to invest. So for those types of people, maybe a non-grantor or an irrevocable trust might work, because then the trust just deals with all the tax issues. But for people who are more concerned about, having control and authority and power over what they're giving their beneficiaries, then an FGT might work best. So what are some other goals that are achieved? Well, non-US situs trust assets are not subject to US estate tax upon death of the grantor. So earlier we had discussed using a non-US corporation to hold certain assets because as the shareholder of the non-US corporation, the FGT will own it, and therefore by owning shares, an intangible asset, it's not subject to US estate tax. Next, upon death of the grantor, the trust becomes irrevocable and may continue for generations as a dynasty trust and not subject to future US transfer taxes. Right? Another concept that has been thrown around recently for a number of high net worth families is dynasty trusts, right? 朝代信托. Who is it for, right? I would say, depending on obviously the family's net worth, depending on how long they want their legacy to last, an FGT can be designed, can have language to basically act in the form of a dynasty trust, right? So all of the trust assets can just be passed down from generation to generation. You don't have to worry about your immediate children squandering it all. Maybe they get in a nasty divorce, they're the subject of a lawsuit. All of this would be kind of asset protected and self-contained within this trust, this FGT that is now an FNGT and irrevocable, right? And therefore, by having all of the trust assets in the trust itself, by being able to reinvest those assets over time, you really can leave a long-lasting legacy. The last benefit is after death, income realized and accumulated in the trust becomes subject to US federal income tax, but depending on the state of residence, no state income tax may apply. So this is key. My firm works with a number of trustees, and one is based in Nevada, two are based in Nevada, one is based in Delaware. We also work with a company out in South Dakota. So by virtue of having the trust situs in those jurisdictions, once this trust becomes irrevocable, at least some of the income that's realized from reinvesting the trust assets can possibly avoid California state income tax. So I believe that California state income tax, which is currently I think 13.3%, stands to increase by maybe another 3%. So right now, California taxes have become extremely onerous, and this is the reason why some people really are planning to move away. I know a lot of business owners who are now thinking about moving to Texas or maybe moving their tax residence to Nevada for that reason. So by setting up a trust where the trustee is a Nevada trustee, then in the long run, income taxes can be avoided. So as an insurance professional, as a law professional, as an accountant, our goal is to kind of advise our clients properly, again, based on individual circumstances and not really kind of pushing them to one product or one type of tool or another, right? So oftentimes when we're discussing an FGT, we would ask, so where are your assets predominantly located now? Are your assets primarily in China? Are your assets in China owned by a Cayman company, right? Do you have assets in other jurisdictions? Do you have concerns regarding CRS, FACA, or the CFC reporting issues that I mentioned earlier, right? 这些人到底是有申报没有申报，他们有哪一些顾虑 right? We would ask about that. 3 is, do you want to leave a legacy for, your spouse, your children, for other U.S. beneficiaries, right? Remember that the beneficiaries don't necessarily need to be your children, right? You can leave money for relatives, for friends. There's some flexibility there. So again, when it boils down to planning, obviously we have to look at it from a reasonableness standpoint, right? When we're planning this type of structure. But yeah, a foreign national can very well leave assets to a friend of theirs here in the U.S., right? So these are circumstances that we would kind of ask about. The last thing we would ask is, what type or form of planning have you done so far, right? I already know some people come to me and, they have a living trust done already. Maybe they have an ILIT already. Maybe years ago, I have a client who, he set up irrevocable trust years and years ago. Some lawyer told him to do it, but unfortunately it wasn't set up properly. So now we have to fix it. But the point is, I like to know kind of what planning they've done so far. I like to look at all of the trusts that they have. I even look at a lot of their operating agreements and bylaws to make sure that certain corporate compliance measures have been followed. So my approach, I think, because based on my background, handling civil litigation matters years and years ago, is I like to look at the big picture analysis, right? So yesterday I spoke with a client who is a business owner here, and I started asking, they have concerns about asset protection. So I asked them, like, well, for your employees, do you have an employee handbook? Do you update it? Do you have independent contractor agreements, employment agreements? Who is your labor and employment attorney, right? How is your LLC structured, right? Because he has other investors, other shareholders in the LLC, right? So I'm going to look at his operating agreement. I'm going to look at a living trust that they set up in 2004, right? So I like to take, a holistic approach to helping my clients, right? Because I feel like you need to know the big picture, so then you can focus on fixing any issues that might be there. Or, you can have a more targeted approach and really advise them properly, rather than just saying like, oh, here, just take out this policy, put it in an ILIT. Or you want a dynasty trust? Okay, yeah, we'll set up a dynasty trust for you. Oh, you heard about an irrevocable trust? Okay, we'll set up an irrevocable trust for you. Really, depending on the client, they may or may not need all of those things, right? So that's kind of the approach I take. I apologize. A little bit of a cough today. But I wanted to leave some room for Q&A at the end. This is my contact information here. I am fluent in Chinese, as Heidi mentioned. 所以这个中文这个语言没有任何的这个阻碍哈。所以如果你们有任何的问题的话，就欢迎你们随时联系我，谢谢。
看看大家有没有什么问题。我觉得我每次听完呢，我都有很多问题出来。但是刚才在这个威廉律师开始之前，其实我有一个最重要的问题我已经问了，就是如果我们希望这个信托是要 qualify as a foreign grantor trust 的话，这个信托是必须要可以撤销的，否则的话就变成了 FNGT 了，就是 non-grantor 的 trust， 这个非常重要，因为如果你变成了 FNGT 呢，在 tax treatment 上是不一样的，对吧，威廉律师？
没错，没错。
对，所以但是我们很多时候尤其是线上的，我们如果是保险的这个从业人员，我们的专业人士呢，我们以前帮我们很多非美国人的这些客人呢，有设过irrevocable life insurance trust， 因为非常简单，里头 irrevocable life insurance trust 里面就只有一份人寿保险在里面，所以呢，它其实没有那么多的 tax 的问题，因为在没有死之前，如果你每一年只是把保费放到 trust， 然后再把保费拿去付了保费交到保险公司，所以 trust 本身没有 generate 这个 income 出来，那在这种情况下设irrevocable 的，刚才严律师也讲了是没有问题的。那我们因为我前一段时间听到好几个同事呢来跟我讲说，那如果我们现在知道这个 FGT 的那么多的好处，那当初我们为什么要设成 irrevocable life insurance trust 呢？所以我想今天这个听完这个 William 律师的，大家应该很清楚的知道说这个我们当初设 irrevocable life insurance 也没有错，也是对的。其实从我的理解来讲哈，因为我是 salesperson， 我是做人寿保险的，我卖人寿保险的，所以我每次在听这些讲座的时候，我都会把它转化成我自己的一个销售的一个 tool 一个工具。那我觉得 FGT 从我 study 这个 FGT 以来，我觉得它最好的地方就是可以让你的这个客人他在美国以外的一个亲戚或者是一个家人设这个 FGT， 那这些财产也是那个外国人的，所以那个外国人呢可以把这些财产转到美国这个 FGT 这个信托里面。那我们在美国的这个客人，或者是我们在美国的这个人呢，不管他是有绿卡还是公民，都可以作为这个 FGT 的 trustee 来管理这个 FGT， 然后这个客人的小孩呢，又可以是这个 FGT 的受益人。我这里特别想要William律师解释一下，如果我们这个客人是这个 FGT 的 trustee， 对我们这个客人有什么好处？
好处就是说，他可以去监管这个 trust 里面的资产嘛，right？ 所以他可以去 direct 说，这个信托里面的资产是怎么去投资啊，
对，
或者怎么样去分配 ，yeah， 他有控制权。
对，他有控制权，这就是什么呢？我们很多客人在做这个 ILA 的时候 ，irrevocable trust 的时候，他们一直说我不要做这个 trust， 因为我做了这个 trust 之后，我就 give up 这个控制权了，我没办法控制，因为我自己都不能做那个 trustee。可是，在做 FGT 的时候，如果这个钱不是我们客人自己名下的，那我们这个客人他是完全可以控制监督或者甚至呢这个 direct 这里面你买任何东西。但在这里我有一个问题了，因为 FGT 如果去买房子的话，直接去hold这个房子是不是一个最佳的 idea？ 因为 grantor 死了的话，这是
还是不行。So that's why 你就是还是要有一个这个一个公司的实体夹在中间，因为这个公司的实体就是所谓的这个 estate tax blocker。
对，所以如果是有一个LLC 的话，行吗
？If the owner is， 就是说 if 这个设立人就是说完全是一个 non-resident alien， 他也没有意思要来移民到美国的话。Then it's actually preferable to use a foreign company， 一个 offshore company。
一个 offshore， 就是说最好不是一个 LLC， 对吗
？LLC 是这样子哈，今天我要先声明，就是说我今天讲的一切东西，你们还是要找会計師去 verify。OK， 我今天给的，对，我今天给的完全不是 tax advice。OK，I don't want to get in trouble for this。有一些人的做法是说，他们怎么来挽救，就是说现在很多这些尤其是中国人，他们这些年来在美国投资房地产然后就是说他们就是 要给他们的孩子啊，或者怎么样怎么样。那后来就是有些人怎么建议呢？就是说，哦，那你赶快去成立一个 LLC， 对不对？你赶快去成立一个 LLC， 然后你逐渐的，就是说把你 LLC 的这个股权，就是说转移给你美国的这个孩子 ，right？ 他们找的这个漏洞是什么呢？就是因为 LLC 的 interest 它本身是无形资产。OK， 所以一个 foreigner 他可以去做这样子的一个移转，他不能够直接把这个房子就 quick claim 或者去赠与给他的一个 US beneficiary， 但是他可以去，就是说怎么讲，就是去 transfer 他的这个 LLC interest。所以我之所以为什么我要 disclaim 这个东西，是说我100%没有说这个是正确的做法，我也不能够保证说这个不会被 IRS 注意到，为什么呢 ？Because you still get K1s, right？ 很多这些 income property， 它有 rental income，so income is distributed。首先原本是 100% to 一个 non-resident， 对不对？那我们刚才不是也讲了，就是说它还可以做这种 net basis election， 去用 deduction 把它的这个 net income 可以降低嘛，就是它可以少交点税嘛。但是如果是说它逐渐这个 K1 又出现了一个人。Right， 然后逐渐就是说，他们这个 K1 这个比例是颠倒了。Then that could trigger an audit, right? So 有时候我是觉得是这样，就是说，首先他们这个 planning 的这个从最初买这个房子，可能这种做法就是错误的。但是因为很多 real estate agent， 他们也不一定是有意的，他们自己搞不清楚这个问题，他只要是说把这个房子卖给你就算了。所以他们没有办法去预料到说，哦，这个将来有移转税的问题 ，right？ 所以这个不能100%怪他们。但你现在要怎么去 fix？ 你怎么去 fix 的话，那 sometimes it's too late，right？ 那所以就有人想出来说，哦，那我就去用 LLC， 然后我去把 LLC 这个股权去转让。但是 I cannot promise， 就是说这个是 safe， 这么去做。我知道有一些人也成功的这些年来也做了，but 这个就是比较 risky。然后我补充一下刚才 Heidi 讲的，就是说，其实我觉得在设立这个 trust， 很多人忽略的就是这个 trust 里面的这个角色应该由谁来扮演 ？OK， 这个要扮演这些角色的人又与这个设立人是什么关系 ？So let's talk about life insurance, right？ 用 ILIT。Why do we use an irrevocable trust for life insurance? Well， 如果你的这个 policy 的这个 owner，right， 他是一个美国人 ，right， they would be subject to estate taxes on the life death benefit， right？ So the point 是说，你用一个 irrevocable 的 life insurance trust， 也就是说，我 gift 的只是 premium， 但是这个透过杠杆增加的这个 leverage 的这个变大的这个 death benefit， 请不要算在我的遗产内。Right， 因为有些人买的 policies 可能上百万、千万的都有，请不要算在我的遗产内，不然这个遗产税我付不起。So that's why they make it irrevocable。但是 irrevocable 呢，他们也许做错在什么地方呢？就是他这个 trustee， 就是他自己人，他自己的人啊，不是他本人，可能是他的太太 ，right？ 可能是他的小孩。Well, that's a problem, right？ 因为我刚才讲到的那个 Internal Revenue Code 672C 是说 related or subordinate party，OK， 如果是在你的 trust 是可以有 material 的 decision making，right？IRS 会说 no， 那这个东西就还是算是 grantor，right？ 所以想想看，在 FGT 的话 ，we want the IRS to think that， 对不对？我们要 IRS interpret 说这是一个 foreign trust， 所以 that's why。FGT 里面的角色可以由你的亲人甚至所谓的 subordinate party 是你可以由你的 employee 来扮演 ，OK？ 因为我们要 IRS 把这个视为说，哦，这个其实就是这个 foreign grantor 的东西 ，OK？ 所以它可以享用 foreigner 的税务上的这个优势。But when it comes to life insurance for U.S. persons， 我们是要把这个 death benefit 与这个设立人要撇开嘛。所以你今天如果是用一个 related or subordinate party， 那 IRS 他哪一天就是说这个 trust 要分配的时候，他说wait let me see the trust， 对不对？你把 trust 给他看，他说哦，原来你的小孩子就是你的 trustee。Well, unfortunately they're related to you， so 我们还是要把这个 death benefit 算到这个设立人的这个身上，那这个就会造成很大的问题。
完了啊，威廉律师，你这一讲啊，我都吓到了，因为我的 irrevocable life insurance 的 trustee 就是我的儿子，那我就有一点疑惑了。那为什么那么多律师啊？我知道在这个问题上一直都有 argument， 就是有些律师说最好不要是你的小孩，最好不是你related 的 person。可是有的律师说呢，没有关系，你的儿子可以做这个 irrevocable life insurance 的 trustee。OK， 我就说这个 argument 已经很多年了，从来没有解决过。今天您又提出来这个问题，所以我相信线上有很多questions 是关于这一点的。那
是这样子，因为就是说有一些律师 ，you're exactly right 啊，因为我的 position 啊，我做事情是比较保守 ，so that's why 我会跟很多 trust company 有比较紧密的这个合作，因为我会推荐客人说，你去用一个第三方独立的第三方来做你 trustee， 因为这样子可以避免任何的这个问题。而且如果 IRS 有 inquiry， 其实这个 trust company 他们可以做一个防火墙，他们可以先去应付这个 IRS， 他不会直接就找到你身上 ，OK？But yes， 这个 related or subordinate party in the context of a life insurance trust is debatable， OK？因为有一些人是觉得说 ，What is the purpose of the life insurance？ Right？ 有很多人他是用 life insurance because they're already in a state tax territory， 它是可以 provide liquidity。对不对？你不需要说，你有 estate tax， 你要去卖你的房子啊。像那天我们斜对面就有个 estate tax 的一个 auction， 一个 estate auction， 就是因为那个家庭他们可能过世，他们必须要去卖这个东西，他才能够去付那个 estate tax 的这个 liability。所以有很多人就觉得说 ，OK， 我 even if depending on the size of your policy，right？Even if 这个东西会列入到你的遗产内 ，maybe you still don't hit。The estate tax threshold, right? 比如说一个 family, let's say 我们就用这个今年的这个免税这个额度 ，maybe 他们蛮有钱的 ，OK？ 他们身价夫妻俩加起来可能是1500万 ，OK？ 他们去买了一个也不少钱的一个500万的一个 life insurance policy. Well, for them, yeah, even if they put it in an island.Okay, 其实他们也没有必要放在 island，but even if they put it in an island， 其实谁是他们的这个 trustee 不重要嘛 ，right？ 因为你其实把这个500万算到加到他们1500万上面，他还是没有 estate tax 的这个 liability。I think 就是我的建议，就是说 for 你 Heidi 哈，就是说 如果 you're in estate tax territory， 谁是你的 trustee 会比较重要。会比较重要，我不能说是100%是会影响还是不影响，但是它究竟是谁会比较重要一些。可是如果你是一般的99.5%的美国家庭，就是根本没有到那个境界 ，then for them it doesn't really matter。那只是说你有这么一个 policy，yeah maybe it's still a significant distribution。你说几百万的钱，你说你真的是要一下子分到你的孩子吗？也不一定。所以有一些人他还是会选择用一个 trust 去 hold 这个东西，然后用 trust 的条款去逐渐的去分配嘛。So for those people, yeah， 他可以用他的亲戚，他可以用他的长子，对不对？他可以用他的谁，就是说最懂事的这个亲戚啊，他的是谁孩子去做这个 trust 的 trustee 嘛？你明白我的意思吧？ So I think it really depends on whoever did your trust， 就是说。Maybe 他有考虑到这些因素，他觉得说，哎，用你的儿子是 OK 的。You just have to think about it.
对，我想呢，华人很多人在 irrevocable trustee 上面用自己的孩子呢，其实除了刚才说，哎，我觉得信得过而且华人呢讲的难听一点呢，他觉得实际上还可以把手伸进去控制这个这个 trust， 是因为他孩子是 trustee。那其中还有一个最大的原因就是，如果用 trust company 来做 trustee 呢，因为多多少少还是有一些费用，所以大家又觉得说，哎，我没有必要花那个钱。包括我自己，我当初为什么没有用 trust company 来做 trustee， 就是因为我觉得我不想花那个钱，我觉得我儿子已经长大了，他可以handle 或者 management 这个只有一份人寿保险在里面的这样一个 irrevocable trust。今天我们本来是在讲 FGT 的，那我们只是呢把我们平时比较 confused 的一些问题可以提出来，请 William 律师因为你要是平时去咨询 William 律师的话，可能要交450块钱。那现在呢，我们 free 的用一下，然后多问几个问题。那这个 William 律师我就想知道，那既然对 trustee 其实也是一个非常重要的一个因素在里面，那 FGT 的 trustee 是不是也要考虑到是不是 related person 呢？就我刚才讲的，如果我们的客人他是一个美国公民，但是他的妈妈是中国人，是非美国公民，那他妈妈设了一个 FGT 那我们的这个客人是个美国人去做 trustee 然后我们这个客人的小孩是这个 FGT 的受益人，那这个样子下是不是也会 consider 这个 trustee 是 related person 呢？
Yes.
所以最好不要这样做，对吧？
Well, for an FGT, it's okay. 对不对
？OK.
FGT 是 OK 嘛？因为你这样子才可以去破他那个 control test 嘛。对，你是用你的儿子做监管人，那其实 IRS 就视为说这还是妈妈的嘛。Yeah. So that's why FGT 它的这个逻辑其实是反过来的，它是要说我不要符合 control test。
OK， 所以它跟 IRS 是反过来的。
对，它跟 irrevocable trust 是反过来的。irrevocable trust 是说 you have to satisfy court and control， 但是 FGT 是说 you have to satisfy court test， 你才是美国的 trust。但是你要作为是 foreign grantor 的 trust 的话，那你就是要 fail 那个第二个 prong， 就是那个 control。
非常非常重要，非常非常重要。好，现在呢，我觉得我们的 question 里面举一个例子说一说，我们刚才已经举了好几个例子了，我觉得这个可以解决了。那还有个说，外国人在美国拥有房产，怎么样把房产给到女儿？这个女儿也是美国人的身份。其实刚才威廉律师也已经回答了。
对，这个话题我不想在 webinar 讲太多。
对，
如果你没有问题的话，你可以联系 Heidi 或联系我都可以。
对，我觉得刚才威廉律师已经讲过了。其实严格来讲已经 too late， 是不是？
Yeah.
严格来讲已经是 too late， 没办法解决。最好的解决方法就是把这房子卖给他女儿，真正的卖一点，卖一次。
如果是卖的话我补充一下，如果卖的话 there will be a FIRPTA withholding issue， 所以你还要请你的会计师在这个年度去 file 一个退税的一个表格。
是。
对，然后再来的话就是说 IRS 他有权利去看说你卖给谁 ，because they could qualify as a construed as a step transaction。如果是 step transaction， 你还是有问题，
还是有问题。
So 总而言之，对你卖给 I don't know a third party， 对不对？然后你 third party 再买，那你还要讲过了多少时间啊 ？Otherwise it's a straw man transaction。反正这种你要知道，美国法律上，我们华人能够想得出来的东西，所有这些老美已经都做过了。So that's why 他们已经有 case precedent 是说，如果你这么做的话，那其实我们还是会把它视为是怎么样，然后去找你麻烦的。
好的，好
you have to be very careful.
OK， 那还有一点他就说这里呢我们线上还有一个匿名的这样一个问题我就不想回答了我下一次给大家一个建议最好让我们知道你在谁在提问题，因为匿名的话我们不知道你是谁，所以我们不是那么 comfortable 来回答您的问题下次请大家要告诉我们您是谁，因为我们要知道我们回答这个问题是对还是不对所以如果您是匿名的，那对，好，那 是 Larry 这样好了，你这个问题我给你留下来，我私底下会问那个 William 律师的。好，下一个问题呢，我想问一下，就是说如果说有客人问说，那既然是这样，我可不可以用 FGT 去买一份美国的 life insurance？ 这个问题呢，可能我要来回答。我的回答是FGT 呢，实际上它是 consider as a 外国人，只不过这个 entity 它是一个 entity， 可是在 tax treatment 上面，当我们的客人还是还是有生之年的时候，他实际上享受的是非美国人的 tax treatment。所以我有问过好几家保险公司呢，他们是不接受 FGT 来 own 这个美国的 policy 的。但是这个事情呢，还没有完全的 confirm， 因为既然有些公司是接受外国人来 own 美国的保单，那为什么不能够接受 FGT 来 own 美国的保单呢？那现在没有保险公司给我们一个非常准确的答复。所以呢，如果是外国人想要设一个信托来 own 美国的保单，那目前最好的方法是要用irrevocable life insurance trust 来 own， 或者是 revocable life insurance US 的 trust 来 own 这个 life insurance trust。 我不知道我这个解释对大家来说是不是比较清楚了。好，那William 律师你可以看一下，现在还有一个问题在这个问题上，好，这是看得到吗？
再等一下。
Will they all be denominated in US dollars? Do they all have to be deposited or transferred through US financial institutions? Can we use Hong Kong, Singapore, or Taiwan the banks?
我其实没有太看得懂这个问题。So remember, the FGT, okay, the design is that you use an estate tax blocker in between to own US assets, right? So yes, if the investments and the holdings are here in the US, then you're dealing with US currency. Now, the origination of the funds coming in, I mean, that's up to wherever your money is parked now, right? So if you have money, with banks in Singapore or Hong Kong or Taiwan, then yeah, there probably has to be some type of currency exchange if you want to deploy the money here. But again, if you're just using an FGT to hold an offshore company which invests elsewhere, right, then it doesn't have to be in US denomination. I think that's the answer to your question.
好的，非常好，非常非常谢谢。看看还没有更多的 question again， 我是每一次都学到非常非常多，然后每一次这样的学习呢，无论是作为我自己是一个客人我刚才讲了我自己的这个 irrevocable trust， 以及我自己的我的这个财务规划，我自己本人的财务规划，就是我作为客人来听，或者是我作为专业人士来听，我都觉得学到非常非常多的东西。至少我今天学到非常多的这个 sales idea， 我们可以用这个 FGT 来解决我们的客人在海外的资产如何转到美国来，在美国这个进行投资，美国进行规划的时候所产生的一些法律和税务方面的问题。好的，今天我们要再次谢谢威廉严律师给我们带来的这么多这个干货实实在在的落地的这样一些有帮助的资讯新年呢还没有这个过完很多人在这个亚洲的都还没有翻工，还没有这个上班， 在美国我们更是没有休息一天，所以我们还在这个新年的庆祝活动当中。所以在此呢，我们要给大家再一次拜个年，祝您呢在牛年牛气冲天，牛年吉祥，然后阖家欢乐，幸福健康。那有任何问题，我们继续沟通。最后要打一个小广告，星期五我们内部的训练，也就是星期五早上我们内部的训练，由我本人来讲 Sales Ideas， 也就是在疫情发生以来最困难的时候，我们到底怎么样去揣摩你的客人的心态，怎么样 handle 所有的 objections， 怎么样去找到开发新的市场的一些思路。好的，我们星期五再见，下个星期三大家继续关注我们美国奥奇宏盛的云星会。好的，谢谢大家。